Hello everyone and welcome to Ash's Whisky Wars, and for today's Whisky War we've got two peated Tobermorys, Ledaig. We have the Ledaig Rioja cask against the Ledaig 9 cask strength. Now both of these I've decided to war against each other because they're both wine cask finished. So the Ledaig being a wine cask from Spain, the Rioja, and the 9-year-old is actually Bordeaux, so from France. The Ledaig Rioja cask is bottled at 46.3%, as is just common practice with Tobermory whiskies, and their peated line also, Ledaig. And we have the cask strength, which is bottled at 56.8% ABV. I'm really excited to get stuck in. As many of you guys know, I adore Ledaig whiskies. And these are two great ones as well. So after this, I'm going to be recording the Ledaig 10 against the Ledaig 18. That's going to be an incredible whisky war. So do make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And let's get straight into it, shall we? So the Ledaig Rioja cask on the nose. I actually filmed a couple of years back now the Rioja cask against the 10-year-old. And I did usually always prefer the 10-year-old. Although I still like the Rioja cask. But I have to be honest, just nosing this whiskey, it's sensational. It's so good, but it's really different. So it might not be for everyone. And I used to say on this whiskey, I get a cherry bakewell tart, if no one knows what that is. Cherries, candied cherries with almond pastry, basically, with some icing on. And a bit jammy in the middle. It's still pretty apt, to be honest, but I now think it's a little bit more raspberry forward, raspberry heavy, which I have to say is pretty unusual for a whiskey, for me, what I get in a whiskey. I recently had from the bakery down the road actually, it was a chocolate brownie with raspberry sort of candy on top, but it was small crystallized pieces of raspberry on this chocolate brownie, but the raspberry was super pronounced, very very potent, and even though I get no chocolate on this whiskey, that raspberry smell to the brownie and taste is so prominent on this nose. But if you imagined replacing that chocolate brownie with a salted caramel slice with the raspberry, that is exactly what you're going to get on this whiskey. It's so reminiscent of that. So it's very dessert-like, but in a very unusual way. The salted caramel note is amazing. The raspberry note is amazing, very strong. And with that comes this very earthy peat. And I used to think of this whiskey as cooked vegetables. It gave me that sort of smell. Boiled vegetables. When you've finished the pan water that has the vegetables in, if you smell it, a little bit of sulphur maybe, if you're cooking cauliflower or broccoli. And there's a little bit of that to it, so there is a bit of sulphur in here. But that earthy peat, it adds a tobacco touch, fallen leaves, wet logs, like a mushy, boggy feel to the whiskey, but it still has that raspberry to lift it and add sweetness to it, and that salted caramel that adds sweetness and a dessert-like feel to it. So on the nose, it's very unique and very interesting. I do recommend, if you're into Ledaig or you're into peated whiskey, I really do recommend giving this one a shot. But anyway, we'll compare it to the Ledaig 9. And it's initially very, very different on the nose. So the Rioja cask is non-age dated. So I would assume it's younger than 9 years of age. Possibly, it doesn't smell youthful. So possibly 7 or 8 years of age, maybe as low as 6. But I'd imagine that 6 to 8 year mark. This is 9. And there's no ethanol touch to the Rioja cask, by the way. But on the 9-year-old, the difference is going to be it's a lot sweeter. It's a lot more winey. It has this orange note, so it's fruitier, it's sweeter, it's lighter, but it's also grassier. I get a very grassy touch to this whiskey, which I love. If you could imagine flowers, but if you tore the flower heads off and just kept the stems, that note is in the whiskey, and it's really strong. With that fruity sweetness, the oranges and the wine notes, it's far more reminiscent of a wine cask than the Rioja cask is. And I think the big difference here is going to be the peat. The 9 feels, on the nose at least, less peaty. It's far less earthy. I don't really pick up too much earthiness on the 9-year-old, whereas the Rioja cask, as I mentioned, is very boggy, tobacco heavy earthiness. Although on paper it might not seem that they're very different, because they're two European wine cask finished Ledeigs that are below 10 years of age, there's actually a significant difference here. The other thing that I want to mention is the 9-year-old adds a citrus touch to the whiskey, like a lime juice, and almost something herbal, but it links very well with that grassiness. So a bit more natural maybe, and a bit more dessert-like. Both very good, but both very different. Okay, let's dig onto the taste and let's see if there's any more differences between the two. But just before we do, guys, if you'd be so kind as to click the like button and that subscribe button, that would be much, much appreciated. So thank you. And let's get stuck into it. Very earthy. The nose is sweeter than the taste, but there's still sweetness in the taste. You can tell it's a wine finished peated whiskey. Very earthy, like the nose suggested, but emphasised. Boggy, wet logs, almost rotting logs that are becoming mushy with fallen leaves and a bit muddy. It's got that wet forest feel to the whiskey, with plenty of tobacco, a little bit of soot, actually, a little bit of chimney soot in here on the taste, not the nose. Like I mentioned, the nose was very sweet. The taste is sweet, it has that raspberry running straight through the whiskey, but the earthiness of the whiskey, the boggy nature, it definitely becomes more pronounced. Really nice though, a really good whiskey, but let's see if it's very different to the 9-year-old. First things first, there's a proof jump, and it's way more noticeable on the taste than it is on the nose. The nose actually, it's very soft. It's a really good nose. The taste packs a lot more intensity than the Rioja cask does. Shock, it's 10% higher in ABV, but this mirrors the nose a lot closer than the Rioja cask mirrors the nose on the taste. Citrus, zing, but still that wine fruitiness characteristic runs through this whiskey. The grassy nature still runs through the whiskey. It's a sublime whiskey, it really is. I perhaps should have tasted this one before I tasted the Rioja cask, because the peat isn't too obvious for me, but that's purely because I've come from the Rioja cask, which tells me the peat is lighter in the 9-year-old. It doesn't mean that it doesn't taste peaty. I know from previous experience, I've drunk quite a bit of it, that it is peaty, very peaty, but it just does not have the same depth, the same earthiness, the same tobacco nature that the Rioja cask has. So again, very different whiskies. So Which one do I prefer at the end of the day? Well, in my opinion, I prefer the 9-year-old, because for me that wine characteristic is stronger. It's more natural. The grassiness I think is amazing, and I actually really enjoy that zingy, citrus forward nature to the whiskey. It really amplifies that fruitiness. And so for me, I think this is so well done. But if you prefer a more earthy take to a wine finished peated whiskey, the Rioja cask is going to be the one for you. It comes across more peated. It also comes across more dessert-like. So if that salted caramel and raspberry candy sounds good to you, then I really would urge you to go for the Rioja cask. Now, price. The Rioja cask is available for £36 in the UK, that's RRP. And the RRP of the 9-year-old is actually about £78 in the UK. So more than double the price. I actually paid £63 when this whiskey was on offer, which it does go on offer, but not as regular as the Rioja cask goes on offer. And I paid £28 for this. It's no longer 28 on offer, but it's about £31. So the value for money is pretty obvious which one's the one to go for. I would say if you enjoy your peated whiskies but don't want that heavy earthy peat, which I would say is the Rioja cask definitely, then you would have to pay extra for the 9-year-old. If you're a peat lover and you love that earthy touch to a whiskey, look no further than the Rioja cask. It is a sensational whiskey, and bang for buck, Ledaig they nail it. This Rioja cask and the 10-year-old are mind-blowing for the money, in my opinion. Do let me know in the comments down below, guys, if you think they're also bang for buck, but mainly, which one would you go for? If you had both of them, if so, which one did you prefer out of the two? But if you've not had both of them, based on what I've said, which one would you fancy going for the most? And do bear in mind that price discrepancy as well, because it's such an important factor for a lot of people, including me. I like to think this channel is a value for money channel, so I always focus on that aspect. And even though I prefer this whiskey, if I was buying both again, if I finished both of these, which one would I buy again? I would actually go for the Rioja cask. That's just because I would wait for the sale, £30, and I just think for £30 the quality of juice that you're getting is incredible. It really is incredible, and Tobermory deserve a lot of credit for that. Did review this one against the 10-year-old, so that was a great whiskey war as well. I do more often than not favour the 10, but this is incredible as well. So it really does depend on your palate as well. I actually think this whiskey out of the 5 Tobermorys that I've got is the worst value for money, but only because their range is so good on value for money. I actually think this is adequately priced or market value for other whiskies of a similar nature, whereas I think some others in their range are just amazing value for money. So it makes the decision a little bit easier. But do let me know in the comments down below, guys, your thoughts. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please click like and please click the subscribe button. That is much, much appreciated because it really does help the channel out. And as always, guys, I hope you have a great rest of your day, wherever you are. Please let me know, actually, in the comments. This is another thing as well. You'll be doing an essay in the comments. Please let me know where you're coming from as well. Where are you watching this video from? I'm always intrigued to know. I know a lot of people, most people are from the US, but I know there's a lot of other people from different parts of the world, and it's always interesting to know where you guys are from. Thank you so much for watching this Whiskey War, and I hope to see you all for the next Whiskey War.